Hi class. So far we have talked about the helper T lymphocytes and cytotoxic T lymphocytes. One thing I would like to point out here is that the helper T lymphocytes, they actually activate the cytotoxic T lymphocytes. So these cytotoxic T lymphocytes or the cytotoxic T cells that you see here, they don't go and bind to the infected cell directly. They are first activated by the helper T lymphocytes. This is a really important concept and you might be quizzed on this on your exam. So please know that the helper T lymphocytes activates the cytotoxic T cells first. Moving on to the B lymphocytes, also known as the B cells. About 15 to 30% of the lymphocytes are B lymphocytes. And like the T lymphocytes, the B lymphocytes are also very, very specific towards a particular antigen. The B lymphocytes, they produce a lot of antibodies, and the antibodies are also known as immunoglobulins. There are 5 types of immunoglobulins. Right now, we are not going into those details. You will learn about those when you move on to micro. Remember one thing, the helper T lymphocytes that we talked about, they not only activate the cytotoxic T lymphocytes, but they also activate the B lymphocytes. Therefore, the cytotoxic T cells and the B cells both are activated by the helper T cells. Okay, now let's take a look here. On the top, we see a helper T lymphocyte, and the helper T lymphocyte finds some antigen. The antigens are denoted by the green balls here. As soon as the helper T lymphocytes find the antigens, it starts producing cytokines and activates the B lymphocytes. Now the B lymphocytes get activated by the cytokines produced by the helper T cells, and the B lymphocytes differentiate mainly into 2 types of cells. The larger cells that you see are called plasma cells, and the smaller cells are called memory B lymphocytes, or the memory cells in short. The big plasma cells, they produce antibodies, and these antibodies will fight against the antigens and kill the antigens. However, the memory B lymphocytes play a very, very important role. These small percent of memory B cells, they remain in circulation, and in future when the same antigen gets into the body of the host, these memory B lymphocyte fights off those antigens without even you getting sick. And this is the same way that vaccines work in our body. We get a mild dose, a very, very mild dose of the vaccine, which is a dead form of the bacteria or virus, and in response to that, our body produces some memory B lymphocytes which are present in our body. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, when we get that infection, the memory cells, what they do is they immediately fight that antigen without us even getting sick. So we don't even feel sick. And the memory B cells, they are always ready to fight off infections. Okay, the last type of lymphocyte is natural killer cells, also known as NK cells. A very small percent of all lymphocytes are natural killer cells. The main difference between NK cells and B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes is that NK cells are very, very specific. NK cells are very, very non-specific. They fight against a wide range of antigens, and also they are known to fight some cancer cells. That's all you need to know about NK cells. Moving on to lymphatic structures. Now, first, I want to point out one thing. Lymphatic structures, they are different from lymphatic organs. Lymphatic structures, they are not surrounded by connective tissue capsule. However, lymphatic organs are surrounded by connective tissue capsule. There are 3 lymphatic structures that we will talk about. Those are lymph nodules, molds or mucosa-associated lymphatic tissues, and tonsils. These three are lymphatic structures. Don't get confused between lymphatic structures and lymphatic organs. Lymphatic nodules. These are clusters of cells with no connective tissue capsule, as I mentioned before. Now, these lymphatic nodules, they actually filter the lymph, and if they find some antigens, they attack those antigens and kill them. On the picture, you are looking at a lymphatic nodule, and if you look at the pale pink colored center, that is called a germinal center of a nodule, and the outer purple part is called the outer part. Now, the inner germinal center has B lymphocytes, some dendritic cells and macrophages, and the T lymphocytes remain in the periphery, in the purple region. Class, sorry, I'm a little under the weather. So you have to remember this for your exam. Okay, so the lymphatic nodules have a germinal center that houses the B lymphocytes, dendritic cells, and macrophages, and the T lymphocytes are present outside the germinal center. Moving on to Molt, also known as mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. Molt is also made up of nodules or lymphatic nodules, which are present in the respiratory tract, GI tract, genitals, and urinary tract. Together, these structures are called Molt. They scan and make sure that antigens do not invade our systems. Now, within the GI tract, the Molt or these lymphatic nodules are so prominent that they got a special name in the GI tract. They are called Peyer's patch. Therefore, Peyer's patch is a mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue or Molt, specifically found in the GI tract. Will you remember that? Okay. That's a Molt. Tonsils. Moving on to tonsils, we have 3 in the pharynx, and tonsils are also lymphatic structures. They are not lymphatic organs, meaning they are not completely covered by connective tissue capsule. We have a pharyngeal tonsil, as you see in the picture. Below the soft palate, you have a palatine tonsil, and posterior to the tongue, you have a lingual tonsil. They always trap antigens that are presented to them by the lymphocytes, and they try to fight those antigens. Moving on to lymphatic organs. Again, what is the basic difference between lymphatic structures and lymphatic organs? Lymphatic organs are surrounded by connective tissue capsule. Lymphatic structures are not. Remember, we talked about 3 lymphatic structures. We talked about lymph nodules, molds, and tonsils. Lymphatic organs, there are 3 lymphatic organs we need to study. Thymus, which is found in little ones. As we hit puberty, the thymus changes into pure fat. And we will talk about lymph node and spleen. Remember, lymph node is not the same as lymphatic nodules, okay? They are different. So, thymus, node, and spleen. These are lymphatic organs. Looking at thymus. Thymus is the site of T cell maturation. In this picture, first we see the heart. Superficial to the heart, do you see the yellowish-orange bilobed structure? That is the thymus. Now, the thymus sits on top of the heart and it helps in T cell maturation. After we hit puberty, the thymus regresses and just transforms into adipose tissue. As you see in the picture, the thymus is a bilobed structure, meaning it has 2 lobes, and each lobe is divided into lobules. Okay, so Thymus is a lymphatic organ that remains surrounded by a connective tissue capsule. If you look at the picture, the white part is a capsule that is labeled, and the capsule invaginates and forms channels. Do you see the teeny tiny white channels? Those are called trabeculae. The point is the capsule invaginates and forms trabeculae, dividing the thymic lobe into lobules. And if you zoom into each lobule, which is also labeled in the picture, you see that each lobule has an inner medulla and an outer cortex. Now, what lies in the medulla and the cortex? Medulla has mature T cells, cortex has immature T cells. The easiest way to remember, medulla, mature T cells. M goes with M. Medulla has mature T cells, cortex has immature T cells. Moving on to lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are found in clusters. For testing purpose, you just need to remember the names of the lymph nodes. We have 3 lymph nodes in the body. We have an axillary lymph node in the axillary region that drains lymph from the breast, axilla and upper limb. We also have an inguinal lymph node in the lower limb that drains the lower limb and pelvic region. And we have a cervical lymph node that drains the head and neck. That's all you need to know about the lymph node. Here, we are looking at a picture of a lymph node. We also see an afferent vessel and an efferent lymphatic vessel. Now, if you look at this lymph node, do you see that it is made up of smaller nodules? And within each nodule, you do see a pale germinal center and an outer area. We can pick this up more in lecture and talk a little bit more on Thursday. Spleen. Okay. Spleen is another lymphatic organ which is supplied by the splenic artery and splenic vein. You can see the splenic artery and the splenic vein in this diagram. You have to remember that spleen is located in the left hypochondriac region, and since it's a lymphatic organ, this is also covered by dense irregular connective tissue capsule. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is that spleen doesn't scan the lymph. Spleen scans the blood for antigen. Okay? And if I zoom into a spleen, you see the splenic artery and vein, and a transverse section on the spleen shows us that it's divided into white pulp and red pulp. The white pulp is whiter in color, and in the white pulp you have T cells, B cells, macrophages. And do you remember we mentioned that older RBCs are phagocytosed in liver and spleen? So yes, the breakdown of older RBCs take place within the white pulp of the spleen. Therefore, spleen is responsible for breaking down older RBC. It also houses T cells, B cells, and other macrophages. All these things are found in the white pulp. The red pulp contains blood for emergency use. For example, if something happens to us and we lose a lot of blood, it is from the red pulp of the spleen that blood will come out to make up for the blood that we have lost. So the red pulp is associated with blood storage for emergency use. That's all you need to know from the lymphatic system. We will pick it up more. We will talk about it a little more on Thursday. Thank you.